everyone. Welcome back from that short break. Pleased to introduce Mike Langley. He is going to do a talk for us, and then we'll have a longer break. Mike Langley received his BA from Connecticut College in 1991 and his MSW from Smith School of Social Work in 1994. He has over 25 years of experience counseling adults and families. He's currently a teaching associate in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He has served on the NASW GLBT Issues Committee and the Massachusetts Commission on GLBT Youth, and currently serves on the advisory board of the Cambridge Commission for Persons with Disabilities. Mike is licensed to provide telehealth in Massachusetts, California, Oregon, and New York. He's the author of Reset, Video Games, and Psychotherapy. Looking forward to hearing from you, Mike.
Thanks, Liz. And hello, everybody. And, a couple of disclosures. First, this is my first Harvard Medical School presentation in shorts, thanks to COVID and Zoom. I never thought I'd be doing that, but here we are. And I'm also really glad that my presentation was at 1:30, not 12:30. There's an entirely different energy you're probably going to get from me. Before we get started, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about my work, and particularly because some of the work I'm doing is work you're becoming familiar with in this kind of strange time. I've been practicing telehealth for almost 15 years. We've learned a few things more recently with the increase of video conferencing about how video conferencing taxes you neurologically. So first off, I want to applaud you for your stamina. You're solidly in this conference. I want you to know a couple things as I get started. One is it is okay to turn off your camera and listen. If your eyes need a break, you're welcome to do that. It may actually help you attend better. I also want to warn you, I have a lot of slides and I use Prezi, so the transitions can be a little bit jarring, and it's all online and going to be available for you forever. The link is in your syllabus. So don't worry about taking notes, and if there's a place where you feel like you want to take a little bit of a break, just rest assured that these notes with the research is going to be available for you. And last and most importantly, if you can help myself and Liz out, I want to leave 20 minutes at the end to do Q&A using a case consultation model, meaning I would love you to bring up some of your cases where technology has entered into it. And I really want you to be thinking about your cases as we go through. And during the course of the session, please send the questions to chat right away so we can queue them up and not waste your time at the end getting them in and sort of having dead silence. So if you have a question in the middle or towards the beginning of this thing, just type it in now, don't wait. So let me tell you a little bit about my area of focus, and that is working with individuals and couples where technology is a primary focus of their presenting problem. And often they've been referred to me after a series of treatments that have either pathologized or located the issue within their tech use. So folks that have had, people talking with them about internet addiction, pornography addiction, gaming addiction, and they often come to me for a different perspective. And when you hear me going through the research, although in the references there has been an attempt to balance the research, you're going to hear my clinical bias. So you might as well know it right now, which is I really try to have a salutogenic or health-based approach to technology. And I try to avoid pathologizing it or have people pathologize it in my work. In terms of couples, there's usually three categories that I see that I've kind of broken the presentation down into. Couples where there's a concern about what we call sexual entertainment media or pornography. So couples where there's porn use, you'll hear me call it SEM for sexual entertainment media. And its impact on couple relationships and both sexual and emotional. I'll have referrals from couples where one or both members have concern with internet infidelity. And the third is couples where there's friction around video game usage. So you're going to hear me talk about each of those three. And I'm going to try to get a case vignette in for each one of them. And we're going to see how that goes. And right now I'm going to actually load up the slides. So give me a sec, and you should be able to see it. now. And I'm assuming I'll be told if you can't. So I want to start by giving you a picture of a pretty famous fellow and his at the time fiance. This is Thomas Alva Edison and his wife. And they were the first ever online engagement. And by that, I mean, they actually had their engagement begun and proposal begun by telegraph. Thomas telegraphed her and she accepted. And it was all done online. And I think that's a way I want us to kind of start, because we tend to think we know what technology is, but we tend to take it for granted when we really kind of have it integrated into our lives. And in fact, what we're experiencing now is a real shift in technology, and I'm going to get to some of that. A couple caveats, and I know that some of the previous speakers alluded to it, but because it's such an important thing, I think it bears repeating. First, sadly, the majority of research is really normed on cisgender reporters. And so for the studies mentioned, when I'm using the terms like male and female, I'm actually using the articles information or the researchers' terminology. So we have a lot of male and female, a lot of cis men and women binaries that are prevalent in the research. Much more research needs to be done on trans and non-binary individuals and couples. There is a lot of material, so I'm going to apologize in advance for getting really going very quickly. And if I have to skip over to make sure there's time for something else, apologies in advance. All right, so first, I want to talk a little bit about what technology does from a phenomenology perspective, in terms of what technology does in terms of human experience. And the first thing technology does is it collapses time and space. This is an example of doing that. This is the observable universe from the photographic lens of the Hubble spacecraft. And this is one example of how technology has, we've heard the terms flattened the world, and I want you to think about it in terms of couples relationships as collapsing time and space. Couples are able to relate in ways that have collapsed time and space much more with the advent of the internet. The second phenomenological piece is about access.
Today I accomplished the goal that I set before the surgery even took place. They were asking if there was something special I wanted to do, like touch my children's cheek or hold my husband's hand, and I said, my goal is to feed myself chocolate. And I did that today.
So the video that you are seeing is a video of a woman who had a robotic arm that was directly linked up with her brain. And this brings us to the second aspect of technology that I wanted you to know about, which is technology allows access. Technology always expands our access to things. And again, I'm using these terms in sort of value neutral ways. It can be access to things we find pleasant, access to things we find unpleasant. In this case, it provided access to increased functioning. And so when we are going through the couples discussion, I want you to keep thinking about and keep in mind the idea of how technology has created more access in terms of couples experience. The third thing technology does is it amplifies feelings and ideas. I didn't think it was safe to post anything about our current election, but I want to give you an example about how in a recent election, technology was used to amplify feelings and ideas when a cell phone recording leaked to the press about a certain politician.
There are 47% of the people who vote for the president. All right, there are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they're victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. But it's an entitlement, and the government should give it to them. And they will vote for this president no matter what. And I mean, the president starts off with 48, 49, 43. He starts off with a huge number. These are people who pay no income tax. 47.
So there is an example of the third phenomenology I want you to keep in mind, which is that technology amplifies feelings and ideas when we use it. So first I want to talk a little bit about the concept of technology in terms of sexuality and relationships. And again, here comes a bunch of slides. First off, technology, needs to be sort of mentioned that it's not eroding a dyadic commitment. So between March and May of this year, we had 450,000 weddings that were planned virtually using sites like Wedding Wire to connect with vendors online. I did tell you about Thomas Edison, but I should also mention that, in fact, the telegraph was the first online wedding. It occurred in, I believe, 1867 in Yuma, Arizona, and it occurred entirely online via telegraph, with bride and groom being in one place and the officiant of the wedding being in another. So we're carrying on this tradition now with things like drones, which allow for weddings that are held virtually. I think the other ways that we have seen technology interacting here is, and most importantly, I think, is for researchers, is that technology advances have renewed interest in studying aspects of human sexuality, such as sexual entertainment media, pornography, because technology makes it easier to both engage in sexual behaviors, but also to research them. This is another I wanted to share with you briefly about a Zoom wedding.
A lot of people who initially marked off this note are able to.
We spent about a year planning for the wedding, and we were pretty excited about that. And got through nearly all of the wedding planning before, at the very last minute, we ended up having to call it off.
Let's kind of let's try, let's just kind of take ownership of the day. Realize that, like, as we actually entertain the idea, like, the steps required to pull it off weren't so Herculean.
I was concerned that it wouldn't feel like we were as connected to all of our loved ones as if we were doing it in person. But in the end, I actually think that it was a really huge success, and like I walked out of it feeling like we had a real wedding.
So let's talk a little bit about internet use in relationships. From one of the more recent Pew Internet Research surveys, we found a whole bunch of interesting facts about internet use in relationship, including that 24% of internet users have searched for information online about someone they dated in the past. And they also use the internet to vet present or beginning relationships. 24% of internet users have flirted with someone online, and these numbers, by the way, are all increasing from the last time this was surveyed. 37% of people in same sex met online. And in the case of younger couples, those who meet online are more likely to be racially and ethnically diverse in their relationship. So like the couple that you just saw in the past video, we're noticing that with younger couples, those who meet online are much more likely to have a diverse racial background in their couple. In terms of internet use when people are coupling, if this sounds like it's you, you're not alone. 25% of married or partnered adults who text have texted their partner when they were both home together. 21% of cell owners or internet users in a committed relationship feel closer to their spouse or partner because of the exchanges they have online. 9% resolved an argument with their partner online or by text message that they were having difficulty resolving in person. 25% of cell phone owners in a marriage or partnership have felt their spouse or partner was distracted by their cell phone use when they're together. 8% of users in a committed relationship have had an argument with their spouse or partner about the amount of time one of them is spending online. And 4% of users in a committed relationship have gotten upset at something they found out their partner or spouse was doing online. So there is a lot of internet usage that is happening both between couples and in the couple. In terms of whether it's had an impact or not, what was interesting when you looked at the more recent research by a different study from Pew was that 10% of internet users who are married or partnered said the internet has had a major impact on their relationship, and 17% has said it had had a minor impact. What this means is that 72% of married or committed online adults said the internet has, quote, no real impact on their partnership. And that the people that did say it had an impact, 3/4 of them said it was a positive one. There was a quarter that did say it was mostly negative or good or bad, but I want you to keep that in mind because in some ways we often see people that are not within the majority of technology use that are presenting to us, that they're actually a select sample that come to see us. In terms of young adults, there's some really important research that talks about how young adults between 18 to 29 receive more support and more attention in their relationships because of tech. 41% feel closer to their partner because of things, and yet 42% say their partner were distracted. 18% argued with a partner about the amount of time they spent online, but they also used it to resolve arguments. So it's important to note that it's a source of both strength and tension in couples. I want to talk about very quickly the role of technology in the democratization of sexualities in couples. And this is, I think, the biggest piece that emerging technologies have had an impact on, which is to really rethink how we understand sexuality and relationship. And so for many of you may be familiar that there are two branches of feminism. One is sex-positive feminism that asserts that sexual liberation is a core component of the women's rights movement and feminism. And in contrast, radical feminism asserts that pornography, or SEM, for example, was a physical manifestation of an exploitive patriarchal culture. And so these two branches of feminism disagree about whether sexual entertainment media reinforces or subverts attitudes. And up until recently, it was much more easy to see how radical feminism had a real strong argument. But what we've noticed is that as entertainment and as technology has changed, we've had more access. As I mentioned previously. And so we saw a transition of adult entertainment from primarily male-targeted stag films to something that was in the 70s much more shifting in gender dynamics and viewing. And then in the 1990s, when the internet was just getting started, this young woman named Jennifer Ringley set up what became known as the Jenny Cam. And what the Jenny Cam was her day-to-day life, which included sexual encounters that were featured by a webcam that was live in her dormitory. And this was viewed by an estimated 100 million viewers logging in every week. And this is back in 1996 when the internet was very new. What's important about this is it introduced a new version of surveillance, and it introduced new exposure to people being able to see different versions of a person's sexuality and romantic life, things that were scripted in a way, and we'll talk about scripts in a minute. Cam girls have to do with sexuality of couples. May seem a little bit hard to connect at first, but when we talk about surveillance and when we talk about the idea of being exposed to a multitude of different people having relationships in real time on camera, part of what happens is that we start to see new models of relationships. And so this is going to change the research, and we've already seen it starting to change the research, because research on sexuality and romantic relationships has historically focused on two polar opposite relationship types: long-term committed relationships and short-term casual sex relationships, like one-night stands or hookups or booty calls or friends with benefits, all of which are actually a bit different. So we're going to talk about the changes in relationship as we go on. But one of the things that technology has done is it's democratized what sexuality means in couples. I want to fast forward through a couple of these things. If you're interested in the difference between what a booty call is and what a friend with benefits is, they are in the slides, and they are significant. But what I think is more important is to get to, one of the studies that talked about, really get to the implications for treatment, rather, which is that right now, research for these emerging or different views of relationships, like friends with benefits or booty calls, is largely limited to college-aged adults and people who have had them. And it focuses on the prevalence definition, how many people are doing this, rather than capturing the experience of people who are currently in them. And so what that also means is that for older couples or even younger couples or disparate couples, we're not seeing a lot of research yet. And that most importantly, from what I want you to take out of this, is who constitutes a couple is probably more varied than we think. And that in fact, who self-identifies as a couple may be changing as time goes on. And why this is important is that therapists need to be educated about these technologies, or we're going to miss things. And we're actually going to miss out on people and intaking people that may be in a couple relationship because we don't see it as a traditional one, or we don't see the beginnings of it as starting in the sort of traditional scripted ways. It's also important to notice that GPS and smartphones have made these relationships more visible, accessible, and traceable. So we're going to talk about surveillance again when it comes to internet infidelity. So let's talk a little about cybersex. First off, cybersex includes a wide range of sex-related actions on the internet. It includes pornography, webcam, sex chat, online sex games, and dating. It is, again, a value-neutral term. It is not bad. In fact, cybersex has some benefits. It can facilitate meeting real romantic and sexual partners. It can enhance sexual arousal. It can facilitate engagement in sexual practices, and it can also help couples with sexual stimulation. It can help with exploration of new sexual practices, and it takes long-distance relationships to a new level with the advent of apps such as teledildonics, which is a fancy way of saying wireless or internet-based sexual stimulation of a partner over distance by use of an app and a sexual toy. Now, cybersex needs to be distinguished between what is cybersex in general and what is compulsive cybersex. And what we are finding, especially in the study by Braham et al. In 2019, is that cybersex addiction per se is not driven by sex, or only to a small part in men. It's more correlated to anxiety and depression. Problems with the idea of compulsive cybersex is important here. Samples are often snowball, either clinicians referring patients they're treating for sex addiction, or convenience samples on surveys. And so part of the problem with the validity becomes the inability to generalize the results of the survey to the population as a whole. And so what we'll see in research is large numbers of the population that's surveyed having problems. But the people that were sampled were people that came to us because they self-identified as having a problem. And so to generalize that to everybody doesn't make a lot of sense. Measurements in terms of psychometrics are far less sensitive. The compulsive internet use survey has 14 questions as opposed to the MMPI 2, which has 567. The number of people scores on that are normed on are much smaller samples. I think I'm just putting this in, not to say that some of these other psychometrics aren't interesting, but that they're not necessarily generalizable to the public, and that we're often finding what we're looking for or what we think of the person. Findings also indicate many of the studies reviewed did not specify or differentiate between relationship types. And what that means is many studies focus on either adolescents or adults. And so we can risk conflating the findings when adolescents and adults use technology differently, use different platforms, and also have different relationship goals. So that when we talk about sexting, we may not be getting it right, because we may be conflating adolescent sexting with adult sexting. All right, so let me talk really quickly about sexting, or the meta-analysis that's been done on this most recently. And when we talk about sexting and cybersex, we try to lump them together in a term called technology-mediated sexual interaction. And the reason we want to lump it together is we want to create something that ages well in terms of a term. And both sexting and cybersex fall under this other concept in terms of interpersonal interaction, self-created sexually explicit content, and occurring through the use of digital technology. So when I'm talking about TMSI, I'm not talking about too much information. I'm talking about technology-mediated sexual interaction. And I want you to kind of keep in mind sexting and apps and all those other things. Researchers can evaluate the relationship context of these particular technologies in three ways. One is the prevalence of people's experience of using it in relationship versus single. Another is the prevalence of people using it with different types of partners. And then the extent to which engaging it predicts or is associated with different relationship outcomes. However, what's important here is that these forms of technology-mediated sexual interaction can be used to facilitate both positive or negative relationship outcomes. So you want to ask people when you're seeing them, are they engaging in sexting or cybersexting together? But also, is that helping them? Are they enjoying it, or is it causing problems? All right, I'm skipping ahead just in the interest of time so that I can start talking to you a little bit about pornography, and we call it pornography or sexual entertainment media. Now, we would assume, according to Poulsen, who did a study in 2013, she wrote, we would assume that relationships between pornography and sexual quality varies in large measure depending on the meaning individuals attach to the use of pornography. And this is really key, because I think we focus a lot on the time spent using it. We focus a lot on the power dynamics that may be represented in it, but we don't necessarily talk about what sexual entertainment media means to individuals that are in a relationship. In modern society, there are two broad ways we construct meaning around pornography or sexual entertainment media. One is that it's a form of sexual expression through which individuals can broaden their understanding of sexuality, or a behavior that can create an erotic climate in which a couple can experiment or enhance their relationship. And the second is that SEM use is a form of infidelity. And in fact, those are two very different views. And therapists want to make sure that they kind of self-analyze which particular view is predominant in their own work. In terms of some of the relationship to couple satisfaction, it's really important when you look at the research to notice that assumptive focus can actually circumscribe research, that we're measuring problems or undesirable outcomes that we're already looking for. And in fact, there are not a lot of correlations in the more recent research that are causal. And so, in fact, we don't know, are people watching pornography because they're depressed, or are they depressed because they're watching pornography? And, a technophobic approach is to label the SEM as the problem rather than either a symptom or a coping mechanism. So the reality is that 20 to 33% of Americans use internet to view sexual content of some kind. And this was back in 2004. I would suspect it's higher. 87% of males and 31% of females in the 18 to 26-year-old range reported using SEM at some level. Recent research has shown that female SEM use is on the rise, with 50% of female adolescents using some form of SEM in the last 6 months. So in terms of the SEM in relation to couple satisfaction, I think I want to let you kind of look at this on your own and get to Vignette. There are some interesting statistics and figures, but I want to make sure that I have time to actually present a case. And the case is Mark and Mary. And Mark was a 36-year-old cis man, and his girlfriend at the time, cis woman. Mark presented to me for couples conflict around decreased sexual intimacy with the girlfriend, work underperformance, and couples conflict and concern about SEM use. He was frequently watching sexual entertainment media on his computer by himself at night for hours at a time. One of the things that happened when we first started to explore his experience of SEM was that he was not using it to achieve orgasm. That was not the primary purpose of it. The treatment actually revealed that his use was not about seeking arousal, but rather to evoke what I would kind of call, and what I sort of talked with him about, is this timeless primary narcissistic state, where he only needed to take care of himself and perform for himself at his pace, and not have any time constraints, which were both present in his work life, where he was procrastinating a lot, but also were present in performative issues with sexuality in his relations with Mary. And so we began to define his use of sexual entertainment media as a signal anxiety, to signal that he was getting anxious about performance, getting anxious about having to do more work or not focus on himself, but focus on somebody else. An attempt to do some adaptive regression in the service of the ego, that, you know, for many folks, an example of adaptive regression in service of the ego is to take a nice hot bath with candles. You can kind of go to that earlier state in your development or your psyche where you have less responsibilities and more relaxation. And he was actually attempting to do this to a certain extent with SEM. And so in our conversations about it, which were non-pathologizing, you know, I attempted to create a place where shame and performance anxiety weren't present, that he didn't in the therapy have to present a certain way or perform a certain way, and then we could talk about his sexual entertainment media use. And above all, help him explain what he was using SEM for to Mary. And as we did that, you know, it wasn't quite miraculous, but it was notable that he started to experience changes in his life. He currently has taken on 2 new roles at work. He's reported increased couple satisfaction and asked Mary to marry him 2 months ago. There's much engagement around that. And much excitement around that engagement, even though COVID, and he reports decreased SEM use. So this is an example where we might have missed, you know, some real good treatment opportunities if we had focused on numbers of hours he was using and or particular things he was excited about rather than his experience. All right, I want to go to the next problem that people present with, which is internet infidelity, and talk a bit about how people actually use the internet together in terms of apps. Again, sharing is a big thing that we find in couples, that 67% of internet users in a marriage or committed relationship have shared passwords, and 27% have an email account they share. So there is a lot of sharing that goes on. That's change in terms of age. I'm going to skip over this because I want to make sure we have enough time. But again, we've noticed that online technology has collapsed space and time regarding sexuality in several ways. We're having an increased access to multiple sources of decentralized sexual information. We're allowing individuals to anonymously connect with others locally who can share sexual interests that are socially stigmatized by society as a large. And that, in fact, constant access to these technologies collapse the amount of time we often use to make decisions, for better, for worse. And in fact, what this does is it changes what we call scripts, which are the repertoire of access statuses recognized by social groups, together with rules, expectations, and sanctions governing access statuses. So males and females learn very different scripts as they grow up. And by puberty, societal scripts are really emphatically making folks believe that being emphatically heterosexual and oriented towards marriage is the predominant script. And in fact, you may recall that this was an earlier way that we got media that would inform and or destabilize our scripts. This is Abigail Van Buren, who is known as Dear Abby, and people would read her and her sibling Ann Landers for years for advice. And this was an example of how media could both destabilize specific sexual and romantic scripts, but also could privilege certain ones. Now, fast forward to the internet, and we have all sorts of different ways to do things. We have Grindr, which will amplify and perhaps distort male body image. 1 out of 5 folks on Grindr posts a headless torso that is emphasizing certain aspects of their being and masculinity, and certain versions of it. It's not just gay men or bi men, it is also lesbians. A quick search on for lesbian couple on Google will show you that lesbian couples are all approximately 20-something and white and have really trendy hair, which marginalizes a large number of people. So again, these apps on the one hand really allow greater access to democratization, but they still can tend to privilege certain types. Now, let's talk about Ashley Madison, which basically launched on February 14th, 2002. It set out to create a singles dating service, but when it discovered that 30% of users were actually people married or in relationship and lying about their status, it changed its focus. It had in 2010 over 6 million members. And one researcher surveyed some of these members and discovered a bunch of facts that indicate both that they are largely educated and largely male and female, but also largely guilty about it or concerned about it. Over 50% used their removed their trails. Before I get to my case vignette, I also want to mention that sexual infidelity online is not limited to networks. So that brings us to our second case vignette, which is Sam. Sam came to see me with a diagnosis of ADHD. He wasn't taking medication at the time, and he was presenting after his wife caught him participating in online and text-based sexual relationships, several of which began on LinkedIn, that people would send him ambiguous recruiting sorts of emails, but then they would turn flirtatious. And he actually got caught sexting with several individuals. His wife began asking to do spot checks on his smartphone, and there was at least 2 threats of divorce during the course of our treatment to date. The course of treatment has occurred entirely via telehealth. And at first, my goal was to help patient acknowledge and express his understanding of infidelity. Given what we've seen with the research previous in terms of Ashley Madison, but also some of the other slides, a majority of people see online infidelity as infidelity. And so that's actually the experience that they are struggling with and struggling to repress. And so, in fact, Sam would start by trying to make allowances for why it happened digitally rather than in person. And we would have conversations about how you really only have one central nervous system. You don't have one for the internet and one for physical encounters. And so the first goal was to really help him acknowledge and express his understanding of infidelity. After he was able to do that, we started to identify sources of marital dissatisfaction and parental stressors. And I began to take over and help him with reestablishing boundaries, and that I would check in with him weekly about his tech use and helping him create boundaries, including having his wife not do spot checks, which were covertly making her responsible for his behavior. I did refer him to an online support group, but I think one of the most kind of psychodynamic interventions that we worked on was identifying phone-based couples activities that helped keep them engaged together, but also helped channel some of the things that were informing his online infidelities to the couple. So, for example, Pokemon Go is this video game where you can actually walk around and catch animals virtually. And so, and some of the things that were the infidelities were tapping into, his interest in novelty, his interest in challenging or chasing and capturing, were able to actually get rechanneled through the use of play into a game where he and his wife are actually both able to share in that together. I am at my 40-minute where we start to talk about Q&A, and I have one more set of slides, which is on video gaming and relationships. But I want to pause here for a sec and just check in, if it's possible, to know if there are any questions already and how many there are. And I guess I'm going to just barrel ahead then, because I'm not hearing that there is
Am I
actually...
live? Can you hear me now, Mike?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. I can.
You can hear me now. There is so far one question.
Okay, great. So Liz, do you mind if I just kind of keep barreling through this last set?
Perfect. Yeah. And
Okay.
maybe they'll keep me on so you and I can discuss.
Great. All right, so folks, again, this is a reminder, please start entering some questions, because I really did rush us through so we have time to do some more interactive stuff. But let me get to the last set of folks I tend to see, which are folks that come to me because they're gamers or they play video games. Gaming and relationships are not what you think. In fact, more women than men own a gaming console as of the last survey we had in 2015 from Pew Internet Research. 65% of American adults play video games daily. And 30% of these adults met a good friend, spouse, or significant other through playing video games. Also, video games are rich symbol sets and arenas within which to safely explore conflict. And gaming actually provide couples practice with communication if they're playing games together. They also provide an arena for individuals in relationship to explore alternate gender roles and alternate power dynamics. Therapists really need to shift their perspective on video games from a thing in itself to video games as a social space filled with rich relationships and object relationships. And all environments impact brain activity, so and therefore relational interaction. So of course, video game environments are not but that doesn't mean they're inherently bad. When couples come to see me, if they're in conflict around video gaming, it usually is in conflict around certain things such as roles. In terms of division of labor, are people in a couple doing the same amount of labor that each of them wants them to be doing? Is the energy in the relationship being distributed equally between the couple and video games? And also, how are their gendered empowered roles in life being impacted by playing video games? There are often different concepts in terms of boundaries and rules with video games. One of the three ways this comes up is anonymity, in that gamers can adopt any role they choose. Boundaries of online relationships are often unclear or not even discussed, so there's an ambiguity. And there's often some accommodation, which is really important in that one can create characters that accommodate how one believes one should be acting. And that is one of the most powerful pieces of what we call avatars in video games. When we are looking at redefining intimacy, we need to take a look at gamer personality, what kind of games they're playing and how their personality manifests itself in there. We're also looking at communication and relational needs. And we also need to look at these things in terms of relationship maintenance. Are these separate video leisure activities or shared? Does anyone perceive some neglect or jealousy? And then we also want to take into account a really positive piece about video games in terms of how they can affect your relationship. And that's what we call the Proteus effect. And you can see this with a really muscled up version of Super Mario down there in the picture. Nick Yee at the Palo Alto Group in 2007 discovered that if you looked at an avatar and played what you thought was a powerful avatar for less than 90 seconds, you actually experienced an increased sense of confidence in interpersonal relationships for up to 6 hours. Okay, so that's less than a minute and a half playing with a powerful video game avatar. You can experience that level of increased confidence. So we don't want to get rid of video games entirely because it actually may make it easier for people to interact and engage with each other if we do it the right way. So let me get to my last case vignette, which is Carlos and Lynn. They were a 25-year-old heterosexual cis couple that presented with marital conflict and maladaptive communication patterns. Carlos had work dissatisfaction and absenteeism, and Lynn had a history of domestic violence in her family of origin from her father. Now, they waited for about a month into treatment to confess to me that they'd actually seen my website and blog, and that the reason they came to see me was because they both played WoW. And even though they had sought me out because I had a gamer affirmative stance, they were worried I was going to pick on them about it or pathologize it. Carlos was a raid leader in a tank, and what that is, the tank is the strong big guy whose job it is to pull aggro of the boss here and get hammered on. And so his role in the video game was really to kind of stand there and take it. And coordinate how this raid, which had 20 people in it, did their attempts to get the boss down. By contrast, Lynn's position was that of a mage or damage per second, which meant she would stand far away and cast fireballs, which did much more damage than anything Carlos was doing. But she couldn't handle being hit like he would with the boss. So her role was one which we call sort of damage per second. Now, this actually was how they argued. She would hurl fireballs of verbal aggression at Carlos, and he would take it and take it and take it until at one point he would lose his temper and he just would stop listening to her and leave. What happened was we started to use concepts that were present in the video game, such as an enrage timer, which is a timer one of those big bosses has before it goes into enrage. And so what that means is if you get this boss to be defeated in under 5 minutes and the enrage timer doesn't hit, then the boss isn't overly powerful. But if in fact the timer goes past 5 minutes, the boss like triples in power and kills everybody in the group. And so what we started to talk about was helping each of them notice when the other one had an enrage timer that was going off, that they had 1 minute left in an argument before the other person really lost control of their neurology and wasn't really able to communicate. And because they did this, they were able to use those metaphors and symbol sets in a way to understand their communication better and ask each other for timeouts. You know, at close of treatment, they reported a marked decrease in marital conflict. Carlos had actually begun to generalize some of his raid skills as a leader into his work and was becoming more successful in work. And there was a decrease in Lynn's anxiety in terms of both her relationship and family of origin issues, because as she put it, when she had been growing up, she had been older than her sister, and she had tanked the boss, who was their father, who was physically violent. And so she had pulled his aggression to her to keep her sister out of danger. And as she put it, I was under-geared at the time. I didn't have the armor, I didn't have the tools to actually successfully defeat the boss. So this is just one example of how video game language, and if used correctly, can actually help a couple achieve better understanding of themselves. Again, apologies for the rapid fire. I had a lot I wanted to get through, but I'd really love it if we could start with some questions, and maybe I can hear a little about your cases. And with that, I will turn off my Prezi and I will reappear.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much for that talk. So we have several questions. They're more quick takes rather than case presentations. And we'll see how many we can get to them in the next 8 minutes.
Okay.
So let's play a game. I'm noticing, somebody writes that they're noticing with clients that cisgender heterosexual females enjoy using technology as a form of foreplay, whereas men seem to use, cisgender heterosexual males seem to use it as exchange. For example, pictures and making plans. What are your thoughts on this?
That's really interesting. We definitely know that across the genders, they're being used differently. What was actually interesting in terms of technology use and gender was that males and females both privileged the relationship over the tech use or the sexuality. And so, in fact, it doesn't surprise me that men are using it more for plans. I think at the same time, you're also experiencing a real flourishing in cisgender women's ability to be freeing themselves up sexually. I am a little concerned about how from adolescence to young adulthood, there is this commodification of images that young women are being much more exposed to and participating in than men. And so they are more likely in some ways to share nudes, and men are more likely to ask for them.
So are you saying that you're more concerned that young women are getting taken advantage of?
Yeah, and again, I think the other concern I have is that patterns that we learn in adolescence persist into adulthood. And although I think we have a very different perspective of sexting for underage people, those folks are going to become adults at some point. And at some point, they are able to legally use and exchange sexual images. And I don't think that's wrong, but I do think it is meaningful. And I do think that, in fact, men are more used to being the consumers of sexual images rather than the purveyors of it.
Okay, great. So in terms of the Sam case, somebody wants to know what's the reasoning in telling Sam's wife not to do spot checks, and they say, isn't transparency key?
It is, unless in this case what was happening was Sam was having a really hard time taking responsibility for his own behavior. And in fact, part of what was causing Sam to be deceitful or avoid this was because he had a really hard time setting boundaries. And so the goal was really for him to work with me to be establishing that, yes, he is accountable to be faithful in his marriage as the two of them have designed it, but that in fact, the more his wife did these spot checks, the more it was implying that she was somehow responsible for overseeing this, and that Sam actually really needed to work hard to develop an observing ego and take responsibility for himself. And that in fact, the fact is she could do these spot checks, but people are very technologically savvy, and that doesn't necessarily mean he's not able to cover his tracks. So it was really a way of helping him set some boundaries and redirect where he was doing this. and also a way of helping her, who she was involved in her own therapy, get in touch with some of the understandable anxiety about you never know. You never know if a partner is using technology, no matter how many times you check their smartphone.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. I'm going to save this one. Well, no, when do you, with around these kinds of issues, when do you choose to work with people individually and when with the couple?
Oh, so it depends on who presents. And really, there are so many good couples therapists out there. And I don't mind doing couples work, but it's definitely not something that I feel needs to be the majority of my caseload. I choose to work with couples when the technology piece is predominant, so that either if the two of them are really engaging in gaming together, or if they have concerns about technology use, and that is a central piece of the couple. Otherwise, I'll do couples work, but I don't feel like I have a specific expertise on that any more than, I in real life, I do telehealth, but I'm also home-based in Cambridge. So there's many good couples therapists. I think my expertise is more where the technology is a predominant piece of it.
I see. Is there a correlation between SEM use and diminished interest or capacity to engage in sex, IRL?
Yes, there is
In
a
real
correlation.
life.
Yes, IRL, I like that.
Yay.
Yes, there is a correlation. Yes, there is a correlation, and that's the problem, because correlation is not causation. And in fact, it can actually be used by partners to jumpstart their sex life or to try to. Men and women use it differently. Men are more likely to use sexual entertainment media for themselves and their own pleasure, whereas women tend to use it more for the relationship. However, again, we need to take a look at, is this an attempt to cope with an underlying depression, or is it actually causing sexual dysfunction? And I am not at all convinced that it is causal. I think it is complicated and correlated, but I don't think it's causal.
Okay, we have like a minute, so I'm going to ask you hopefully a yes or no question. A gay patient is enjoying more hetero-bi pornography, power games, son, stepdad, mother-in-law, etc., than gay one. His partner is worried. Should he? No such preferences in real life as in virtual life for the gay patient.
Shouldn't worry. I am with Judith Butler on this, which is that there are as many heterosexualities as there are homosexualities. Again, I would have the couple look at the scripts that they were taught about what they have to be. And that we talk a lot about heterosexual and homosexual and bisexual, but we don't talk a lot about monosexual or asexual or sexual discordant couples, asexual folks and allosexual folks, which is a fancy way of saying people that really enjoy sex versus people that are just not that interested in it. So I would say keep it complicated.
Okay, thank you so much for that talk. Before you and I pop off here, I have a couple of announcements. So right now, we are on the schedule to take a break from 2:20 to 2:50. However, at 2:38, for people who want to see the video that we didn't get to see yesterday of Robin Deutsch, if you want to come back at 2:38 Eastern Standard Time, we'll show the video and I'll comment on what she was doing. And I have a few ideas from her about what she would be doing next. So if you want to see the video, come back at 2:38 Eastern Standard Time. And if you want to stick to the regular schedule, come back at 2:50 Eastern Standard Time. And then we'll have moderator Chris Lim with our second half of the day program. Thank you, everybody.